I think this wonderful quote, Richard Kearney's quote, "Every human existence is a life in search of a narrative," is just a profound way to understand what we're talking about. We parents spend the majority of their time in talking with their kids in storytelling. It is the way we make sense of the world. We enter the world connected to multiple stories which we are handed as part of our family, as part of our heritages, where we brought up. And we're constantly trying to figure this out. It is the air we breathe, and it's how we make sense of the world. And think about a moment, it could have been a year ago, could have been could have been early this morning, where there was a story that you were experiencing that was so engaging. And it could have been like sitting reading a book, could have been in a movie theater, could have been anywhere, where you are so transported by what you are listening to that you forget where you are. It is almost like you've left your body. Now, I would imagine all of you or just give a nod of heads of those, like, just you'll have a sense of what I'm talking about. Like a book that good, you forget where you are. Okay, so I'm seeing most of you, or anything where you see it. So I think it's a pretty universal experience. Sociologists have actually understood and called this transportation. And neurologists actually show what happens in the brain, where you are so transformed that oxytocin starts being produced and you start identifying with the characters you are seeing. And so this guy, Paul Zak, a neuroscientist, studied this when he watched $1 Million Baby and was just overwhelmed. And he was like, oh my gosh, like something is happening in the brain. And the power of that is that your prefrontal cortex starts shutting down, and it's not about reason. It's about an emotional connection. And so I think that is why storytelling is so unbelievably powerful. And think about great writers, actually, yes, Tolstoy, they've understood this from the beginning, that if you literally infect people, go beyond a sense of reason, is this right or wrong, and you just go in the flow, and the better the writer, the better the artist, the more you do it, you short circuit the critical facility. It's no longer about like, I agree, I disagree. You're there, you're in someone else's shoes. And so that is a power that I don't think we always understand how forceful it is and how it can change minds. And Paul Zak, the professor, could actually show the more you were transported, the more oxytocin was flowing, the more likely you were going to give money, you were going to engage. And so you actually see now the neuroscience proving what happens. And so I think that is the kind of storytelling I'm talking about. And it can be a photograph. It can be a small video. It can be a tweet. Rarely a tweet. I think it's just too short. But again, the example I gave you at the beginning, that little element could put you in ahead if you really thought about it. So that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about storytelling. And a lot of things can trigger it. It could be listening to a friend, a story you've never heard before. So it really is broad, but when done well, it enables you to reach people you could never reach before. And James Joyce talks about it as de-worlding you, literally taking you out of your world and into someone else's. Aristotle talks about it as catharsis. It's something that we've known, but I think now we have the neuroscience to show just how powerful it is. So I want to go. Actually, let me just, any questions as we dive into an example? I want to bring it to life in a couple of examples. Any questions? All right. So I'm going to play a video now, and this is a campaign that actually started in the earlier 80s, but it was a very big campaign that a fortune was spent on, and I'm just going to play it, and then I'd like a few of you to tell me, do you think it was impactful? Was it good? Was it bad? Just I'd like your critique of it. All right, so I'm going to play that now.
Is there anyone out there who still isn't clear about what doing drugs does? Okay, last time. This is your brain. This is drugs. This is your brain on drugs. Any questions?
So I'd like just a show of hands. How many of you are familiar? Just raise your hand if you're familiar with it. Okay, so a good number of you are. What did you think of the spot? Like, do you think it's impactful? Yes, no, or just, I'd love any thoughts. Who'd like to go first? Grace.
Hi, I thought it was funny. I think it was a little impactful where it was really easy for us to understand. Obviously, the egg is like frying, it's bubbling, like it doesn't look like something a brain should be doing, right? But I feel like I wasn't taking him as seriously as I could have. Like it wasn't informative.
Great, thank you. Aniket and then Caroline.
I have like two parallel thoughts here. One is like about when if I was watching this particular video, let's say 10 years back, I would have trusted it. But if I'm watching this campaign right now, I'm not sure I would trust it because the kind of doubts I have about the media campaigns right now, it's so high because I'm definitely sure that that doesn't happen to my brain. But if you're going to tell me that, then the first thought is going to be doubt for me.
Interesting. Okay, helpful. And Caroline?
I think this sort of gets back to what you said about appealing to emotion, but I felt like this campaign felt that it was appealing more to both guilt and almost questioning my education level. And I feel like that maybe made me react a little less well than if it had tried to bring out like sadness or fear or, you know, a different type of emotion.
Yeah, good point. Okay, I see two other hands and then I'll move on. So Masame, and I'm sorry if I'm butchering your name.
All good. Yeah, just to go off of Caroline's point, like I feel like at one point you expect your audience to have a certain level of intelligence, and this kind of goes against that, and it makes you. I mean, I think there's another version of this that I've seen, like where there's a woman doing like a similar thing with an egg. I'm not sure if they had like multiple parts of this campaign, but I think that one was even more aggressively talking about like how your brain's an egg and like it gets smushed, and then like it brings in like the impact of friends and family. I think it's, you know, they tried to represent it in a visual way, but at the end of the day it was too simplistic, and that kind of would probably make a modern day audience feel not so influenced by it.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I think I saw Maggie, and then I'm going to tell you some background on this.
Oh yeah, sorry. Just really fast. I kind of thought it was not super impactful or effective, just because for human beings, the purpose of an egg is to cook it. And so I kind of figured that that's the next path. That's the normal flow of what we do with eggs. So I didn't think it was super impactful.
Interesting. Well, you all have brought up ranges that I think really talk about the pros and the cons. I think this is a campaign that was started actually with Nancy Reagan. It was a just say no campaign. And I think the fact that many of you who probably weren't even born when it aired still know about it speaks to the power. Like it created an identity. Like it broke through in a certain kind of way. And I think some of you touched on that. But the result was, after spending tens of millions of dollars, in part because they hadn't really thought about their audience. They weren't really thinking, and some of you brought this up, it felt patronizing. It felt like your jackass uncle screaming at you. And what it actually did because this was a government campaign, so they spent a fortune, they did all of this testing. Years later, after spending a fortune, they found it backfired. It increased drug use. And so it's a powerful example of how storytelling has real power. But if you don't think about the elements, if you don't think about, well, what is your strategy? You can't just talk down to people. You need to think about, like, what is the issues they're grappling with? And also, what's the call to action except you're an idiot for doing drugs? And so everything about this campaign was wrong, and it backfired. And so now I'm going to show you, and and I forget who said it, Masumi, I think, hints at the spot I'm going to share with you, that many years later, they learned from their errors. And here is a much more recent version that came out, and I just love your thoughts on this one.
This is your brain. This is drugs. This is your brain on drugs. Any questions?
Yeah, I have questions.
Prescription drugs aren't as bad as street drugs, right?
Weed's legal, isn't it?
Drinking is worse than smoking weed.
Isn't it? Why
is heroin so addictive?
Molly just makes you feel happy.
I have questions.
Mom?
Dad, did you ever try drugs?
They're going to ask. Be ready. Go to drugfree.org. A message from Partnership for Drug-Free Kids.
So who is the audience? Like, who's the target audience in that spot?
Definitely younger people.
Exactly. And anyone else?
I believe it's also the parents more than the kids, because I think this is particularly targeting them to understand where to find the answers more than answering the kids. Exactly.
That's exactly right. And it's an interesting example of, you create a brand that the world knows about, you might as well reinvent it for a new generation. And what they knew is that every parent, like every person my age who grew up experiencing the old one, now is like, you know, you need to actually think about this for your kids. And so the strategy of understanding your audience is critical. And it's one of the things I really try to drill home in our class, is I can't tell you every not-for-profit or foundation or media company, when I say, who's your audience, they say everyone. That's wasteful. Like, you really are never, unless you're had billions and billions of dollars, reaching everyone is often not a good strategy because you cannot target it. And so this is a campaign where they really learned, like, okay, who are our influential audiences? Who can we target? What's the message that's going to best get to them? And I saw Hamid had a question. Or am I?
No, you already answered that.
Oh, okay. Any other thoughts about this spot? All right, so I think I share these two spots because I think this one they've actually learned. I think another couple of things, they did the research to actually understand what young people are dealing with. I'm sure every one of the questions they asked were based on qualitative analysis spent in the field. And so I think if you're not listening to the audience you're trying to reach, like the campaign before was really patronizing, and it just said, you know, it's like a parent being a little bit clueless. This one actually is like, you're going to be on the hook. How are you going to help your kid? And it was, I'm sure every one of those statements was drawn from a ton of research showing that was really important. So unless there's any questions about those two, I'm going to move on, because I want to just spend a little moment, this little bit of philosophical diversion, but it explains it. I think one of the reasons probably most of you, if you're thinking about SYPA, have grown up with this Enlightenment view that reason matters. Like reason, we can all be reasoned adults and you use reason to get things done. Like that was my entire experience. And yet neuroscience is now beginning to challenge and show when it works, and it does work. In a class setting, it works. When you're speaking to your base, it works. But when does it not work? So I'm going to give you very quickly a historical overview. So Plato had this vision that has really been what we've been on since Plato first talked about it, which was this notion of the charioteer. That yes, the passions are wild, but reason is strong enough to harness them and get them in line. And that really was the belief through the Enlightenment, and still today. I still think we believe that we can use enough reason to force people to change their minds. So then Hume came along, David Hume, during the Enlightenment, and had something that was radical. He said the exact opposite. He said reason is and ought only to be the slave of the passions and can never pretend to any other office than serve and obey them. And he was saying, I completely disagree. And again, people were shocked by this idea that reason was not paramount, because that still today is what we think. And then came along some neuroscience, which enabled us to figure out who was right and who was wrong. So if any of you have read Dan Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow, you will know about the reptilian brain, the fast brain versus the slow brain. There's been a ton of research about it. But what people have understood is that the prefrontal cortex, which is our kind of rational brain, is a much newer part of the brain. It developed many tens of thousands of years after our older, more reptilian brain. And it is the brain that is our rational center. This guy, Antonio Damasio, wrote a very great book called Descartes' Error, where he actually looked at people whose prefrontal cortex, it was a little bit the lower part of the prefrontal cortex, was damaged. It's the part of the brain where your gut connects to your reason and you process. So you have a gut response and your reason kind of tries to make sense of it. And what happened is when it was cut, it did something really interesting. If you spoke to the people who had this damage, morally they understood right from wrong, but they felt no emotion. So you could show them a horrifying photo and they would be like, okay, it's people in a picture. They would have no emotional response. Or a positive. They literally lacked the intellectual capacity to understand their gut response. And what ended up happening to them is they either were paralyzed because they couldn't make a decision, or the decisions they made were so astoundingly bad that very tragically, they lost their partners, they lost their jobs. It damaged the way they moved through the world. And so what he was able to show, and I'm reducing his brilliant book down to 30 seconds, but what he was able to show is that without the gut, without a sense of passion, we have no ability to reason. And so a lot of sociologists and psychologists and anthropologists have taken it a step further. And Richard Haidt, a professor at NYU, wrote a brilliant book called The Righteous Mind, where he actually said, really, the way you need to think about reason and passion is reason is the writer, but passion is the elephant. And ultimately, the elephant is 1,000 times more powerful. And that really what happens, he argues in a much more complicated book than I can get into, is that if you're going to influence people, you need to apply and you need to you need to appeal to the elephant. Because at the end of the day, the elephant is much more powerful and is going to determine how and where you move people. And so understanding this and understanding all of the research, like if you see the awful polarization, you realize from a lot of these debates that it's about my tribe versus your tribe, or my team versus your team. Reason is not at all in it. It is my guy or girl going to win? And anything that stands in the way, I'm going to rebut it. And the smarter I am, the more I'm going to work at rebutting it. It's not about reason in most cases. You see it playing out in politics. When you scream at the TV, like, how do people not understand it? They're not responding to the policy. They're responding to the personality. They're responding to the team. And so how do you deal with that? And happily, there are ways to deal with it. So without getting into all of Jonathan Haidt's theories, he talks about all of these values and moral foundations. And one of the things, the guy Marshall Gans, a great activist and professor of movements he teaches up at Harvard, he talks about a very powerful idea that storytelling and narrative is the act of translating values into action. And that's probably the biggest thing I share over the course is like, how do you translate values and morals into action? And it is often not starting with reason. It is about emotion, because motion is the means where you make this translation. And so now I want to give you an example that played out a few years ago that just really brings it home. Before I do, because I've thrown a lot of philosophy in the last 5 minutes at you, do you have questions? And I see, Emerine, you have a question?
Thank you so much. Yeah, I've seen a lot of campaigns where you actually need to hit people's emotions to actually get them, to get their awareness to something, to your objective. But my problem lies in, when usually these campaigns, these storytelling always starts from yourself. If you have been somebody who have gone through something like that, for example, or I have been a victim of a rape, or somebody has tried to kill me, that kind of story, that kind of narrative always really appeals to the larger crowd. Generally, and people, then you just reach into this mode of victimization, and then your entire objective of trying to pass on that message really gets lost in translation. One. Number two is sometimes these kind of self storytelling do work. You really get the empathy, and people are very passionate and compassionate for helping you out, your campaign and everything. But then there comes a time where they don't appeal anymore.
Yeah.
How long are you going to be that victim? Yeah. So that's where my problem lies in storytelling.
It is definitely a challenge. I think one of the ways you deal with that is you find other people to kind of represent and be faces and stories of the campaign. And so I'm going to share a campaign with you in a minute around Darfur, when students kind of let me know about the genocide going in Darfur starting in 2002, 2003. As someone who's Jewish, I could identify, but I couldn't, it was impossible. I was not going to be able to do a campaign that connected my story. I was too disconnected from it. And I really couldn't do it till I met this woman, Jacqueline Rakatete, who had lost her entire family in Rwanda and had dedicated her life to fighting genocide. And so she then became the person. So I think activists, civil rights activists understood this brilliantly, where they understood, this person who's a hardcore activist, it's going to backfire. But if I find someone, an elderly matron who is going through this. So I think there are strategies. I mean, one of the great gifts I had in meeting Representative Lewis before he died was he shared with me something profound. We don't think about it, but he said there's a reason we call it staging a protest. It's not haphazard. Every bit of it has been architected in advance. We understand the strategy, the staging, the narrative. Dr. King talked about the Birmingham campaign as it needs to play out like a drama. We're going to start the tension low. We're going to build. We're going to so I think you have to think about it in a much more narrative form. And so, yes, as a white Jewish guy, I was never going to have credibility on that, but I could find the partners and the allies that would meet a much broader audience. So yes, it is a great question. And I as part of the class, we share, how do you do that? How do you tackle those topics? Any other questions before I get to the example that kind of brings this to life? All right, so, okay. This is, since you can't rely on the facts, how do you influence? You know what the answer is going to be, storytelling. So I'm going to give you an example of a campaign that played out that some of you may know of, some may not. So in California around 2008, as there were all of these anti-gay marriage campaigns playing out, everyone thought California, super progressive state, was going to say no to this super anti-gay campaign that was going to refuse, because Governor Newsom was doing these gay marriages up in San Francisco when he was mayor at the time, and the Republicans and the conservatives said, this is ridiculous, we need this thing to stop gay marriage. And everyone thought, oh my gosh, California, this is going to be easy. Obviously they're going to be against it. And so I'm going to show you two different spots. I'm going to show you the group that was for ending gay marriage and the group against it. And I'm going to share these now. All right, so this is the yes on Prop 8. And this would have meant no, we are going to pass a law saying gay marriage is outlawed in California.
Mom, guess what I learned in school today? What, sweetie? I learned how a prince married a prince, and I can marry a princess.
Think it can happen? It's already happened. When Massachusetts legalized gay marriage, schools began teaching second graders that boys can marry boys. The courts ruled parents had no right to object.
Under California law, public schools instruct kids about marriage. Teaching children about gay marriage will happen here unless we pass Proposition 8.
I'd love
Yes
your
on
thoughts
8.
on that. But before you do, I want to show you the liberal response to that.
Hello, I'm No on Prop 8.
And I'm Yes.
I maintain the current Constitution and give everyone equality in the eyes of the law.
And I eliminate rights. But just for certain people, so it's cool.
Right. I'm into fairness and dignity.
Me too, totally.
But yes, you just said
No, just not for everyone. I want to preserve tradition.
By putting discrimination into the Constitution?
Yep.
Doesn't sound like the California I know.
Okay, you know what? Name one thing more important to Californians than stopping same-sex marriage, all right?
The economy, unemployment, healthcare, the war, the environment.
Ugh, boring. I'd like to see where all this fairness and dignity is going to get you.
Yeah, me too. We're all Californians. We're all equal. Let's keep it that way. Make sure you, your friends, and your family vote no on Prop 8.
What?
Yeah, it's the right thing to do, buddy.
So tell me, what
That hurts.
Which one did you think was more impactful and why?
Okay, I'll just go ahead. I believe that the first one actually was a little bit more impactful to me. The second one, just because the second one reminded me of the Mac versus, there's like an ad, right? There's like an ad of like, is it Mac versus like Microsoft or something? I don't know. That's what I remembered. And I guess like because California is like, they have Silicon Valley, that might be like relevant to them. But I feel like this is more of like like emotional / religious like issue for a lot of people. And in the first one, they're actually talking about like the family. I mean, it was a bit aggressive how the guy came in at the end and was like, it was like more like fear mongering. But the segment with the daughter and the mother would kind of resonate more with like, I guess, parents than these two guys just like arguing back and forth. That's what it would seem like to me.
Thank you. And I saw Alex's hand go up. All right, you raised your hand.
I did. I just want, this actually relates to an earlier question I had about ensuring that campaigns are culturally relevant. It seemed like the first one really knew its audience and was speaking in a way that would resonate to the audience, but the second one was targeted towards more like a millennial audience, but those just statistically don't necessarily vote. And so now we know the outcome of what happened with Prop 8. It's clear that one like really honed in on that audience and knew who their voters were, versus the other seemed to do more like a pop culture trend take on the issue.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I see Charisse and Justin. Did you have your hand up? And so Charisse, Justin, Caroline, and then Maggie.
Hello.
Hi.
So for me, I'm from California. So I remember watching the first one as a kid and just being like, what the hell? Like, that's not right. Like, that's not okay. Like, so I think that was way more impactful, because I'm pretty sure I saw the second one, but I was kind of just like, like, okay, we're using a lot of big words that like I don't understand.
Yeah.
And so I think that kind of goes to like Alex's point of like, it was trying to target a certain demographic, but like obviously we weren't going to understand like all those things. Like if I watched it now, I'd be like, that's right. But like, that's because, like I'm studying law and like I can understand like the nuances.
Exactly.
But yeah, I think the first one was way more impactful.
Interesting. Yeah, no, you raised good points. Justin.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing about the first one is that it comes off as it's actually taking your choice away in a issue that's actually about providing more choice to somebody else.
Yeah.
And so it feels like this person is coming and basically forcing this thing onto you, and you can't do anything about it. And it creates this visceral reaction like, well, no, I want to have those rights. And then the second one is actually interesting because it wants you to side with the person who's actually being quite condescending, even though he has a good point. And so, it's not very engaging, and it actually makes you kind of, if you're a person who is on the other side trying to trying to be, reasoned with, you kind of feel like this person's just making you sound like you're a bad person or stupid.
Exactly. It's a little bit like basket of deplorables. It makes people who maybe aren't sure feel like idiots. So it shuts down potential allies. I'm sorry. I believe I saw another hand. Oh, Maggie, Caroline and Maggie, and then I'll go on to the next.
I was just going to say, I felt like the first one really appealed more to the heart and to emotions. As a parent, you don't want your children learning these things that you disagree with. That goes against your beliefs and your values. Whereas the second one was more an appeal to the mind, or it was just more like, well, do this because it's the right thing to do versus, what you feel in your heart.
Very much, yeah. One was an intellectual exercise, the second one was an intellectual exercise. He sounded like a legal scholar. Caroline.
Well, also from a logical perspective, I felt like the first one made me feel as though they were appealing to non-voters and also inspiring voters who might have been on the fence into voting. The second one didn't really feel like it was appealing to anyone that didn't already agree with the message.
Bingo.
So just logically, from like getting people to come out and vote, it didn't feel like the second one would actually inspire anyone to vote who wasn't going to vote or who disagreed with you.
That's exactly right. It's exactly right. And I think one of the things, and it's a fascinating case study, because one of the things that they learned, because they were shocked, California is so liberal, how could this happen? What they did is they went out and they did a lot of research, and they said, okay, there's the homophobes, we're going to let go of them. There's our base that will always support that, we're going to let go of them. Let's talk to the 60% of the people that are in the middle. And they asked them a couple of questions. They said, and again, they were getting at values and morals. They said, what does love and marriage, what does marriage mean to you? And they said, well, it's about love and commitment. And then they said, what does it mean to gay people? And they said, it's about rights. They want these rights. And so in that questioning, they realized, like, no wonder we're losing. This is about love. This is not about rights. It is about rights, but that's an intellectual argument. It's never going to work. And so they had 4 different state examples of these referendums coming up, and they created brand new spots. And I'm going to share both of them with you now. And it was a gamble, because they could have lost all 4, because some of them were like Oklahoma, a red state. Others were Maine, which is a little more balanced. So I'm going to share these. This is what they learned. Again, the entire shift was a narrative shift based on the research. Here you go. Here's the first one.
Here in Oklahoma, we value family. When Deidre told me she was gay, as her dad, I was worried because I wanted to protect her. When Deidre met Amber, I realized that she could have a family. Only marriage means the ability to take care of your family.
Why shouldn't they know the love we've had all these years?
As a veteran, I know freedom means freedom for everyone, and no family should be denied a basic freedom.
Marriage enhances our community and makes families stronger.
Give you the sense of the diversity of the small.
We've been married 52 years.
And we've been blessed with 4 children. When our son told us he was gay,
it was tough to get used to. We came to love him for who he was. We watch Jonathan and Ryan and see their profound love for one another and how they support one another.
I see their love and commitment for each other. If our son Jonathan and his partner Ryan could take wedding vows,
I think that'd be great.
So how do you think, what do you think of those spots, and do you think they were successful or not?